Mind clicks. Russia fines Google 2.5 decillion.
Welcome back to Mind Clicks. You guys ready for a wild one today? We're about to dive into a story that sounds like it's straight out of some crazy science fiction novel.
It involves a penalty that's so big it makes the entire global economy look like spare change.
No kidding. We're talking about Google facing a penalty of 2 undecillion rubles, courtesy of the Russian government.
And most people probably haven't even heard of an undecillion.
I know I hadn't before this. We're talking about 2.5 decillion US dollars.
A 2 followed by 36 zeros.
It's mind-boggling. So how did we even get here?
Well, it all started back in 2020 when 2 pro-Kremlin media outlets, Zargrad TV and RIFNN, sued Google.
What were they suing about?
Their complaint was that Google blocked their YouTube channels, which was most likely due to U.S. sanctions because of the situation in Ukraine.
Ah, I see.
It really highlights how these geopolitical tensions can spill over into the tech world and put companies like Google in a very difficult position.
For sure. So these lawsuits, though, were they like a slap on the wrist, or do they actually have some teeth?
Oh, they had some teeth. They came with daily fines of 100,000 rubles, which, maybe doesn't sound like a lot at first.
Yep, true.
But here's the thing. Those fines were structured to double every single week.
Wait a minute, double every week?
Every week.
That's nuts.
Yeah, it was basically a ticking time bomb and designed to escalate the pressure on Google.
So it was never really about, collecting on an actual fine. It was about,
It was about leverage.
a power play.
Exactly.
Right. So
it's a really fascinating case study in how these sorts of things play out.
So where does that leave Google now? What are they supposed to do?
Right. Well, to understand that, I think we need to consider their current situation in Russia. Their Russian subsidiary filed for bankruptcy back in 2022, and they've also halted advertising in the country.
Right.
So even if they wanted to pay, it's not like they have a huge pot of rubles just lying around.
So what are their options? What can they even do?
Well, it's tricky. They're caught between complying with U.S. sanctions and facing this mounting pressure from the Russian government. It's a tangled web, and there are no easy answers.
Talk about being stuck between a rock and a hard place. But this isn't just about Google and Russia, is it?
No, not at all. This case has huge implications for other tech giants trying to navigate the global landscape. It sets a precedent for how governments might wield financial penalties and legal pressure to try and control what happens online.
So it's about the future of the internet as a whole.
Potentially, yeah.
Are we looking at a future where every country dictates its own online rules and fragments the internet as we know it?
That's the undecillion ruble question, isn't it? The stakes are incredibly high. What happens in this case could reshape the internet for generations to come.
Man, this is feeling less like a deep dive and more like we're caught in a digital thriller unfolding in real time.
And we're right in the middle of it, trying to make sense of it all. This case shines a spotlight on the challenges of a globalized internet. Where do national interests end, and where does the right to a free and open internet begin?
Okay, hold on. Let's take a step back for a second because I'm still trying to wrap my head around these fines doubling every week.
Oh, yeah.
What's the legal strategy behind that? How is that even possible?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. The strategy they're using is based on something called astrante.
Astrante.
Yeah, it's this legal tool used in some places, including Russia, to make sure people follow court orders.
So it's not just like some random made-up penalty?
No, it's very calculated.
Okay.
And it's designed to create this sense of urgency. By making the fines bigger and bigger so fast, the court basically lit a fuse on a financial powder keg and pointed it right at Google.
And that's working. We're talking an insane amount of money. How could any company, even Google, afford to pay that?
They can't. That's the point. The Kremlin doesn't actually want the money. They want to force Google's hand.
So it's more about, getting Google to do what they want than actually collecting.
Right. It's a high-stakes game of chicken, basically.
So what does Google even do in this situation? If they restore those YouTube channels, they're going against U.S. sanctions, right?
Exactly. That's the dilemma. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. Bound by U.S. law, but also facing this enormous pressure from the Russian government.
This is like a digital Cold War spy thriller or something.
It really is, and the whole world is watching to see what happens. The outcome could be really bad for internet freedom everywhere.
You're saying other countries might try to do the same thing, control online content using tactics like this?
Absolutely. If this works, it could give other governments ideas about controlling tech companies in their countries. Imagine a world where the internet isn't this free and open place anymore, but a bunch of separate digital areas, all with their own rules and restrictions.
That's kind of scary. It's like a digital iron curtain descending, with governments controlling information instead of letting it flow freely.
That's why this case is so important. It's
Yeah.
not just about a fine. It's about the future of the internet as we know it. The fundamental right to information and free speech online.
This whole thing makes you think about national sovereignty versus a global internet. How do we reconcile the two?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
The internet was supposed to be borderless, a place where information could be shared freely. But as it's gotten more powerful, so have the attempts to control it.
So where do we go from here? What can Google do? Can they get out of this without major consequences?
They could try to negotiate with the Russian government, but that's risky. They might end up breaking U.S. sanctions.
And if they just refuse to comply, what then?
That's risky too. The fines would keep growing. They might get sued even more, maybe even have their assets seized. It's a gamble.
Damned if they do, damned if they don't. It sounds like there are no easy answers.
That's the reality of operating in a globalized world. Unfortunately for Google, the stakes are incredibly high. Their decision could affect the entire tech industry, influencing how other companies deal with similar challenges.
It's like they're walking through a minefield. Every step could be a disaster. But this isn't just about Google, is it?
No, it's not. It's about every person who uses the internet for communication information connection.
So we're all affected by this.
You're right. This case should be a wake-up call. It shows that the internet, despite being global, is still subject to the political and economic realities of the world.
So what can we do? Is there anything we can do to protect the internet as a free and open space?
That's a great question, and it's important.
Yeah.
But first, I think we need to talk about another crucial aspect of all this. This whole situation, it's not just about legal stuff and fines. It's about who controls the information online, what we see and hear.
So are we talking censorship here? Is that what the Kremlin wants?
It's definitely possible. By silencing people they don't agree with and controlling what everyone sees, they can really influence public opinion.
So in this case, pushing their pro-Kremlin viewpoint and making sure no one sees anything that contradicts them.
Exactly. It's part of what's called the information war. It's this battle to control the digital space where they use narratives like weapons and public opinion is the battlefield.
Wow, that sounds intense.
Yeah.
But how does a fine, even a huge one, actually help them win this information war?
It's about sending a message, not just to Google, but to everyone in Russia's digital space.
Like a warning, we're in control here. You better follow the rules.
Right. It's a power move meant to scare companies into submission, make them think twice before challenging the Kremlin online.
So what's the big picture here for the internet? Are we heading towards a world where it's all fragmented and controlled?
That's the question, isn't it? And the answer depends on what happens in this case, and others like it. They'll have a huge impact on digital freedom going forward.
It's like we're at this crossroads where the idea of a free and open internet is clashing with national interests and the desire for control.
And the choices we make now will determine what kind of online world we'll have in the future. Will it be a place for open dialogue and sharing ideas? Or will it be divided up with governments deciding what we can and can't see online?
Those are some heavy questions. But what can we do about it? As individuals, it feels overwhelming, like we're stuck between governments and these huge tech companies.
It's true, these issues are complicated, but we're not powerless. The most important thing is to stay informed, understand what's happening, educate ourselves about the consequences, and talk about the future we want to see online.
So don't just skim those headlines. Really dig in and try to understand.
Exactly. Being aware is the first step. Then we can support groups that fight for digital rights and freedoms, hold our leaders accountable for their internet policies, and make smart choices about the online platforms and services we use.
It's about being proactive, shaping the digital landscape instead of just passively going along with it.
Right. The future of the internet isn't set in stone. We create it through our choices and actions. And by understanding these dynamics like we've been discussing today, we can be more informed and empowered participants in how it all evolves.
Wow, this deep dive has really opened my eyes to how complex the digital world is. We started with this crazy fine and ended up exploring the core of internet freedom and the fight for control over information.
It's all connected, and it's more relevant than ever. As the internet keeps changing, the challenges to protect its core values of openness, accessibility, and free speech will keep changing too.
Thank you so much for taking us through this complicated and thought-provoking discussion. It's really been enlightening.
It's been my pleasure. These conversations are so important. We need to keep having them. The future of the internet depends on it.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of undecillion ruble fines, information wars, and the fight for the soul of the internet. Keep those minds clicking.